Howdy y'all, welcome back to another video. This one is going to be a bit of a departure from my regular type of content, as this will be more of a reaction to a clip I found quite encapsulating of how a news organization, and particularly Fox, hone their narrative. I'm going to be skipping over the other two talking heads they brought on in this clip, as I don't want this video to be 45 minutes long, and I think a brief observation of how much misinformation they can pack into just 2 minutes will be a good reminder to pay attention to the game of misrepresenting reality to craft alternative narratives. The man I'll be focusing on is credited with being a historian, which irked me to no end, as being seen as an authority on history and yet so blatantly misrepresenting the history we're living in is troubling. I haven't researched much about the person in this clip, as it's not about him, but rather how offhandedly narratives are created by the media utilizing half-truths and cognitive dissonance to achieve political goals.
And what do you think about the future of conservatism, of Trumpism in the United States?
I think there's a reign of fear going on, Martha. I think people in Twitter and Facebook understand that with the Senate and the House and the presidency and the hard left in control, they want to preempt that danger, and they want to have a deal with the powers that be. They're afraid the left is going to be angry at them that they even let Trump express himself.
It's interesting that the first thing he appeals to is the fear that is circulating in the nation, and then directing the source of fear to the alleged hard left that has taken control. Which, as a historian, he should be well aware that Joe Biden and many around him in the Democratic establishment tend to distance themselves from the left and are more accurately classical liberals, which is far from being hard left, and actually toes the centrist line, swinging like a pendulum between right and left in the smallest of margins. Lastly, they aren't afraid the left will be upset that they ever let Trump express himself. A private company has the right to ban people for violating terms of service, and Twitter specifically was a vehicle he was using to propel massive amounts of disinformation and conspiracy, with aims of disillusioning Americans to reality for his own political gain, which culminated in an actual attack at the Capitol building, leaving 4 people dead, all because he refused to concede that he had legitimately lost to Joe Biden.
The bigger irony is that these issues were adjudicated in the 19th century when we said that railroad companies and oil companies, they were private companies, but they used the public domain, and that people needed a railroad to get from one place to another, or they needed a telegraph to communicate with another, or a telephone. And we decided that these were public utilities, and we had public utilities commissions. And then these companies came in and they took over that role. You communicate through these new public utilities, except they're not public utilities. They're private companies, and they use their power for political and partisan agendas.
Okay, so saying that a social media platform deplatforming people is at all akin to the 19th century railroad companies is merely an appeal to his authority as a historian. Cool piece of information, but it has absolutely nothing to do with the right of privately owned companies to enforce their terms of service. Have they done it well consistently? Obviously not. However, when the President of the United States refuses to comply with the terms of service of a website, he too may be banned. And while I can kind of see drawing a line between private companies marketing themselves as public utilities that you must have with the rise in reliance on these things, that's just an accidental bash on consumerism and capitalism. In addition, railroad and telephone companies were not broadcasting your actions to the world on a public platform that has the terms of service. They are simply a dishonest comparison. Also, research shows that more folks tend to be radicalized to the far right by misinformation on social media platforms. When someone like Alex Jones gets banned off YouTube, it's not because he's a conservative, it's because he will lie to his audience about dangerous things that lead to violence in real life.
And whether that's Google searches that are warped to reflect a predetermined result, or Twitter having no consistent policy. I mean, we're talking about Joe Biden's speech on race. Roz Simone, an African-American self-described warlord, took over an area of downtown Seattle. 4 people were shot. There was no police reaction. They ceded the territory, the autonomy of a whole downtown area to him and his followers. And did they suspend his Twitter account? I don't think they did.
Hot out the gate with the super woke take that Google search results are warped to reflect a predetermined result. That is how search engines work. The implication, of course, is that Google is explicitly censoring things that they don't want you to know, but I can test that the allegation holds water when talking about suppressing conservative institutions. Then we get a very interesting pivot to an unquoted Joe Biden tweet about race, then he immediately pivots to an African-American warlord that took over part of downtown Seattle and was responsible for 4 deaths. If you knew the real story of Raz Simone and Chaz, it would be clear that this is just race-baiting, fear-mongering garbage, and he is deliberately misrepresenting reality in order to exacerbate the ever-present figure of the violent black man that has become a staple in American media. Raz Simone is a musician and activist. The guy worked for the Boys and Girls Club when he was a kid, for crying out loud. You can see the man's life on the internet. He is far and away from a warlord. He rose to prominence in the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone as a leader in the chaos after things had already escalated to an extreme. He in no way had anything to do with initiating the events or subsequent deaths that occurred in Chaz. But it sure is easy to point at a black guy that you see with a gun in a chaotic civil rights protest and call him a warlord. They've had that track on repeat since my mom was a kid. Equating Raz to Trump is intentionally dishonest and just further drives that delicious cognitive dissonance. Trump broke terms of service and, as sitting president, tried to rally his followers to help usurp a democratic election, while Raz grew to be a respected figure of peace in an increasingly violent civil rights protest, and he sure didn't try and direct his followers on Twitter to try and take over downtown Seattle.
So, there's no systematic policy here, and it's not going to stand because this sort of fervor that we're in now, is Salem witch trial mentality, to destroy people, to ask senators to quit, to cancel book contracts. There's a McCarthy-esque, scary smell to it all, and I think that people need to wake up and take a deep breath and say, do we really want to turn the United States into Salem, Massachusetts? Because that's where we're going.
It's funny to me that he equates the Salem witch trials with modern boycotts and deplatforming. Because, I seriously think after hearing him speak that he would be someone during the Salem witch trials that would justify the murder of alleged witches by pointing to vague, dishonest historical precedent. Also, he's talking about this being McCarthyism when Fox News literally still perpetuates the anti-communist rhetoric of McCarthyism.
And these are the robber barons of the 19th century, and there was a progressive, ironic, a progressive movement that said, you know what, they're monopolies and they're trusts, and we've got to stop it. They've got too much concentrated power and wealth. And now the progressives are saying, let's give them more as long as they work for us.
It's going to be interesting to see what happens to all of those people on Twitter, the ones that are left. A lot have already moved to Parler, but all of this is going to be unraveling. So,
well, that move to Parler aged like milk. But I want to leave off here with a note on his remarks about how progressives used to be anti-monopoly and massive allocation of wealth and power into the hands of a few. They still are. And if you listen to people actually on the left and not just liberals, they criticize these things constantly. They're also probably quite happy that the blatant fascist finally got kicked off platforms he should have been booted off years ago, as his rhetoric has directly led to a swell in extremist violence in America. Thanks for watching another video. I hope you all enjoyed this more loose form, off-the-cuff kind of content. I may do more of it in the future. It sure is a whole heck of a lot easier to make than the other kind of videos, but we'll see. Thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and be the best you can be today. Bye.